Now, you know I've been critical of just rushing into any therapy. We need to do proper studies, placebo studies. But, you know, while we're putting $4 billion into this coronavirus and everyone's waiting with bated breath for a vaccine, wouldn't it be really smart to actually start trials on products, some of them that have already been proven safe in other uses, or in stem cells that have shown a lot of success in other respiratory illnesses and clearly, you know, in this one patient had some success? I mean, these are the types of things I'd really like to see being reported on America. Besides just locking down our borders, what are we doing to heal those that may be in harm's way? I think that that's important for all of us to think, you know what, there is hope out there, folks. There are cures. And when we think about this vaccine, it could take years, which leads me to my next story. You know, it is very, very rare that I tend to agree with Dr. Paul Offit. I think I've done it once before. I forget exactly why. Now, this guy is one of the top spokespeople for the vaccine industry. He also developed and made a fortune off of the rotavirus vaccine that is mandated upon our children now as we speak. But I actually agreed with him this week, or perhaps he agreed with me. I'm not sure which happened, the chicken or the egg, which came first. But let's just take a look at some of the statements he made because I think it's very important what he's saying. This is Philly vaccine pioneer. We can't rush a coronavirus vaccine. If you're going to be testing this in otherwise healthy people who are very, very unlikely to die from this infection, you better make sure it's safe, so you want those regulations in place. An example is the dengue vaccine. When it was tested in Latin America and Philippines, it was found to actually increase your risk of dengue shock syndrome. Children who were less than 9 years of age, who had never been exposed to the virus before, were actually more likely to be hurt by the vaccine than helped by it. Now you only knew that from doing large clinical trials with tens of thousands of people. I mean, I think that because we falsely overrate or incorrectly rate, listen to this, we falsely overrate or incorrectly rate what the mortality rate is, we're willing to accept that things will be rushed through. In fact, coronavirus doesn't have a high mortality rate. There's a virus that the CDC currently estimated has killed between 20,000 and 45,000 people in the United States, influenza. But only half the country gets that vaccine. There's only 14 deaths in the U.S. as of Friday afternoon from COVID-19, but everybody would get a vaccine now. The point being, we're not very good at assessing risk. I think that's really quite informative and shocking to be coming from, you know, Dr. Paul Offit. I was scratching my head saying, isn't this exactly what he wants, to rush into a vaccine? And isn't that what he wanted? He wanted every adult on the planet to believe that we need vaccines in order to survive? Yet he's being very cautious. If you don't find that shocking enough, there's another person that likes to attack us all the time, attack me all the time, Dr. Peter Hotez, who actually works at designing vaccines. I'm going to agree with him. Or, in fact, I think in this case, he really is actually agreeing with me because what he's about to tell, you know, in front of, I believe this is the Congress that he's in front of? Yeah, so speaking in front of the Congress, this is what he had to say. And by the way, I already told you much of this a couple of weeks ago. But here we are, me and Peter Hotez, like this, saying the same thing. Take a look.
We partnered with a group at the New York Blood Center and the Galveston National Laboratory to take on the big scientific challenge of coronavirus vaccines. And I say a scientific challenge because one of the things that we're not hearing a lot about is the unique potential safety problem of coronavirus vaccines. This was first found in the early 1960s with the respiratory syncytial virus vaccines, and it was done here in Washington with the NIH and Children's National Medical Center, that some of those kids who got the vaccine actually did worse, and I believe there were 2 deaths in the consequence of that study. Because what happens with certain types of respiratory virus vaccines, you get immunized, and then when you get actually exposed to the virus, you get this kind of paradoxical immune enhancement phenomenon, and we don't entirely understand the basis of it, but we recognize that it's a real problem for certain respiratory virus vaccines. That killed the RSV program for decades. Now the Gates Foundation is taking it up again. But when we started developing coronavirus vaccines, and our colleagues, we noticed in laboratory animals that they started to show some of the same immune pathology that resembled what had happened 50 years earlier. So we said, oh my God, this is going to be problematic. And these clinical trials are not going to go quickly because of that immune enhancement. It's going to take time. And so, and unfortunately, some of my colleagues in the biotech industry are making these inflated claims. You've seen this on the newspapers. We're going to have this vaccine in weeks, or in this and that. What they're really saying is they can move a vaccine into clinical trials, but this will not go quickly, because as we start vaccinating human volunteers, especially in areas where we have community transmission, we're going to have to proceed very slowly, very cautiously. The FDA is on top of that. They have a great team in place at the Center for Biologics Evaluation Research. They're aware of the problem, but it's not going to go quickly. We're going to have to follow this very slowly, cautiously, to make certain we're not seeing that immune enhancement. So, now we're hearing projections a year, 18 months, who knows?
Pretty shocking, right? I mean, to watch these guys that are usually screaming vaccine, vaccine, Ebola vaccine, it's all coming. All of a sudden, they're tapping the brakes. But I really want to address the fact that we already covered this discussion. In fact, we gave you a lot of detail more than 2 weeks ago. This speech happened on March 5th. But 2 episodes ago, I actually brought up the animal studies that Dr. Hotez is referring to. I want to show you this because these same people that are agreeing with me this week tend to say that I'm spreading misinformation. But the truth is that we're bringing you information even before the scientists are. I have proof of it this time. Take a look what I told you on this show 2 weeks ago about the animal studies. Immunization with SARS coronavirus vaccine leads to pulmonary immunopathology on challenge with the SARS virus. The lung section suggesting hypersensitivity that was reminiscent of the description of the Th2 type immunopathologic reaction in young children given an inactivated RSV vaccine and subsequently infected with naturally occurring RSV. This is an older study. Here was the conclusion from the studies. These SARS-CoV vaccines all induced antibody and protection against the infection. They seem to work. However, when challenged, challenge of mice given any of the vaccines led to occurrence of Th2 type immunopathology suggesting hypersensitivity to SARS-CoV components was induced. Caution, look at this. Caution in proceeding to application of a SARS-CoV vaccine in humans is indicated. So this study even went on to say what we're seeing reminds us of a human study we did on children, totally different vaccine, RSV, where they seemed to do great with the vaccine, even had antibodies, but then when they came in contact with the disease, they actually had a hyperstimulated reaction. What they found was the body took in more of the virus or the bacteria. This is something that's known to happen on occasion and made them more sick than they would have been. And as, Hotez went on to say, it's something called immune enhancement. For some reason, the vaccine appears to create antibodies in the person or the animal using it. In the children, it was with RSV. But then when they come in contact with the illness that the vaccine is supposed to protect them from, for some reason, they have a hyperstimulated, called an immune enhancement reaction. And as Peter Hotez said, we don't really understand it. We don't understand why it happens or how it happens. And that's why we need to proceed very, very, very cautiously as we move forward. He even sort of, rags on a couple of his, fellow biotech companies that are saying we can do this in 12 months to 18 months. And he's like, yeah, we'll see. Now, part of me really found myself grappling with why all of a sudden is Peter Hotez tapping the brakes and Paul Offit tapping the brakes. And it really made me realize that because something is about to happen that's never happened before. In fact, it may be a really strange type of gift. You see, what's about to happen is a vaccine trial, a stage 1 vaccine trial under the microscope of the American people, of the world actually. Billions of people are about to watch this study take place. Here it is. Let's go back to that headline. Kaiser Permanente, Washington, enrolling participants in first coronavirus vaccine trial. Moderna is the name of it. Moderna's coronavirus vaccine ready for clinical trials. As pressure for coronavirus vaccine mounts, scientists debate risks of accelerated testing. They're going to crank this out. Seattle gets first go at coronavirus vaccine testing. And then, of course, we know that we're being told that 45 individuals, here it is, the initial trial will need 45 healthy adults. Jackson said that no research participants will be given a placebo. What? Wait a minute. I thought we just heard Tony Fauci saying to us the gold standard for approving a pharmaceutical product in the drug trial, that they're doing. He said the gold standard is a placebo-based trial, yet with the vaccine, we're not going to use a placebo? You see, normally they get away with this. And this is what it led me when I was thinking about Paul Offit and Peter Hotez. You see the problem they have? We are now all watching this because of the work that we've done with the Informed Consent Action Network, because so many of you are sharing the Highwire with your friends. You're all alert to this now. You're saying, wait a minute, why aren't they using a placebo, especially right now? Even if the study, that we know that the study is only going to last about 4 months, I've already pointed out, I don't know how you're going to establish safety in 45 people with a 4-month study. There'll be no look at long-term side effects, autoimmune disease, future cancers, or the fact that once these people, if it actually ends up being like the animal trials or like the RSV trials, what happens if you give these people the vaccine, they look perfectly good for 4 months, and then they walk out and they happen to run into somebody with coronavirus, they get it and they die. Their body, suffers from immune enhancement. They have an absolute, meltdown. A cytokine storm takes place in their body, which is what this thing can cause, and they drop dead. Then what happens? And then I started thinking about the fact that, do you realize that usually, this stage 1 type of trial takes place out of sight, out of mind? It's happening inside of a pharmaceutical clinic. They happen all the time. Most of them fail. Mostly drugs and vaccines don't get out of those first trials because really bad things go down. Now think what Hotez and Offit are thinking. This isn't going to be good for the program if people watch. What if one of these 45 people dies? What if 10 of them get really sick? What if they all end up having massive upper respiratory problems? Then what are we going to do? How are we going to explain that? I mean, we could use our usual antics and say, well, we didn't have a placebo group, so it was natural that one of these people would die. Or, people get upper respiratory. If there's a cold going around, people get the flu. Yes, they got the flu. It happens. They'll try to explain it away, but never before has the entire world been waiting with bated breath, watching 45 people entering a stage 1 trial. I think that's what's got Paul Offit and Peter Hotez really nervous. The pharmaceutical industry has never, ever wanted to try and do something like this under a microscope. They like being left alone. They like having time to figure out what their talking points are. Are we going to know who these 45 people are? And better yet,